All right, so I am joined today by Ronan Berder, and actually, did I pronounce your name all right, or how'd that sound?
Well, I
Or
mean, it
what's
depends. Like, do you want to do it in
I
full
I
French or?
I'd like to do it correctly.
Okay, well, Ronan Berder in English works just fine. If you want to do it the
Okay,
French way, it's going to be Ronan Berder. But I won't hold you to it.
Ronan Berder.
Yeah,
Yeah, I won't. My French is terrible. My French is terrible.
that's quite all right.
Yeah. Okay, great. So, well, thank you very much for joining today. And I contacted you because you just put out Basecoat UI. So just like I guess first thing, so what is Basecoat UI?
Yeah, I mean, in essence, it's just ShadCN UI without React. ShadCN UI being a very popular component library that you know a lot of people are actually using these days in the React community. And it's awesome. It's really well designed. It's got really good APIs, very easy to theme. Lots of support for it, like in terms of extensions to it, and people who actually go and demonstrate how to use it, and for marketing content. I mean, like layouts and whatnot. But yeah, I don't necessarily want to use React these days. So it's just implemented with HTML and Tailwind CSS. Although there's a pure CSS/CDN version coming up soon, and a tiny bit of
Nice.
Alpine JS here and there for some of the more interactive components, but you could actually go and swap it out for your own JavaScript.
Okay. So yeah, so my first thought, and just like, this is ShadCN is a huge project, and it's sort of the backbone of, like a large part of the React ecosystem and all these tools built with it and on top of it. And so, what was the like when you say it's a an implementation of ShadCN? So what does that mean? Is that like did you is ShadCN is open source, and did you sort of take that code and use it, or is it more that you looked at what they did and recreated it?
Yeah, so I actually we can get to as to why I did that in the first place, but I landed on the Tailwind version 4 version page of they have a kitchen sink that is up and on the website. It's kind of showing a demo of what's to come. They're gonna probably go and swap it out for the latest version fairly soon, but I really liked it, and I started to go and look into the code. And like most React libraries for UI are just built the same way. Uh, a lot of them use Tailwind CSS, and you end up with that wall of classes, which is like great when you're doing React because you can just basically it's self-contained in the component. So whenever you use the button component, whenever you use the dialog component, all the classes come over with it. But when you're actually writing
Hmm.
CSS, it's just you end up with like dozens and dozens of classes on each element. And so what I did is just mostly looking at the code for each component and rewriting it in very simple pure HTML with as much, I mean, keeping it as semantically correct as possible and as accessible as possible. And yeah, I mean, I took the classes that you have on those components, all the utility classes, and I just assigned them to classes that I actually use in my code. So there's not really there's a lot of work that went into figuring out the HTML itself. There's a lot of code in adapting as well, some of the CSS, because there's a lot of things that I don't necessarily use. But I would say there's a good like 80% that was like straight up stealing the classes from the ShadCN project.
Yeah, interesting. So I mean that's a okay. So ultimately you went through every component and rewrote it in some capacity to
Yeah.
mix with your sort of way of doing stuff. Okay, so it's not, I was basically just trying to figure out, like, I don't know exactly how ShadCN works. Like, is this just like, you pulled in the repo and then point at it from a different place or something? But that's not what this is. This is a rewrite
Yeah.
using that as a base and expanding on it.
Yeah. And so, like, I don't know, if you're familiar with Tailwind, you'll just use mostly utility classes, right? So you'll end up with that code that we've all seen, and it's fine in many cases, get a lot of advantages, but I mean, the issue is just, especially for very kind of more atomic type of elements like a button, an input, or similar kind of things, you end up with like really that deluge of classes all over your interface. It's very hard to read your code. At least me, I'm probably not smart enough to go and read through that much code. So what I'm doing is, in the case of button, for example, is I've declared a BTN class, and then a bunch of different variants for size and colors and whatnot. And I'm just using the add apply command in Tailwind CSS, and it's just like listing all the utility classes that I want to have like assigned to that class. So
Yeah.
there's not, and it's a lot of that kind of repeated over and over again for all the components.
Yeah. So yeah, so I'll just, for some background, I use Tailwind primarily. I have been using it for years. I come from the kind of Laravel ecosystem, and Tailwind's been a part of that for a while. I love using Tailwind, but yeah, it's like you said, even for demos, for sort of building demos on this channel and trying to show examples, when I have to take Tailwind code and put it in there, it distracts from the demo because all of a sudden I've got this huge pile of attributes, and I like having things there. Like, so, I use Tailwind for a reason, because if I want to customize something, if I want to do something, I do like having the stuff available. So this to me, and I've been on the lookout for something like ShadCN that I can use in my projects, because I love using Tailwind, and ShadCN is so built around the React ecosystem. As I talk to you offline, I haven't had a build system, a build step in my development process in so long that I'm not really used to doing it. So when I come across tools like ShadCN, it's like they're kind of just off the table right now because they're all React focused. So I don't know. This to me is a very exciting project that you're doing. So part of it is also just like, what's your background? Like, what got you into building something like this?
Oh, well, I was a computer science engineer. At least I was trained in that, but I was always really into design. So I kind of actually, mostly I didn't even study computer science really. I studied mathematics, physics, and then telecommunication. But I really fell in love with the web really early on as a student in France, and also really loved designing. And so fairly early on, I started to go and just do a lot of that. Obviously, back in the early 2000s, it's a lot harder to actually go and do open source and kind of distribute those kind of things. But what happened? Well, I started a company in China quite a while ago, and a consultancy. Ended up growing it to about 160 people. I sold it a couple years ago, and almost 3 years ago now. And then after that, I moved to Singapore. Actually, around the same time, I moved to Singapore. I ended up staying at the company for a couple more years, but I finished my earnout end of last year. And what I've been doing since then to overcome my burnout has been just coding, because I really enjoy building products. So
it's funny how burnout is sort of specific to certain types of coding, and it's like you can code forever on stuff you love to do.
Well, I mean, what I was doing at the company before was mostly just people management, finance, sales. None of it are things that I particularly enjoy.
Right. So you started the company coding, but moved into a more managerial role over time.
I'm writing an article about this actually, where I describe the role of the CEO as being the chief janitor officer. You're kind of there to go and deal with whatever crap, pardon my French, people are not dealing with.
Yeah, that was French.
But yeah, and I think it's a good definition of burnout. Like, it's usually stemmed from you doing things that you don't want to do, and you do it repeatedly and over a long period of time, and it just creates a lot of stress. And so, code for me has always been like my happy place. I actually love building nifty little things, and I've also loved putting it online. Honestly, that's kind of like why I fell in love with the web. Was originally back when I was like 20 something, discovered the web, and then started to go and build some software, and I put something online, and I realized that some people were starting to use it, and I read by a couple of people that had written articles. And I was like, holy smokes, there are people actually out there that I've never met actually using the software. But yeah, so that's kind of how I came to writing some more code. And I started by building a bunch of small apps. I ended up building a project called CMS, which is a content management system for static sites. So if you use Hugo or Next or whatever else, and you don't want to use a third-party CMS, you can just use it and directly just edit files out of your GitHub repo. And it's all React and Next.js. and I got
Yeah.
really burnt out of it. I got really sick of JavaScript. I think that initially I thought, I'm surely the idiot. I'm not good enough, and I don't understand how things should be done. But over time, once I got like a little bit more confident, I just realized that no, I mean, I just don't think that's for me. Like it works for others, that's great, but it's not for me. And so,
Right.
after a few months last year, I ended up starting to switch over back to Flask and Python, and that's where I started diving as well into htmx and a bunch of other things. And yeah, over the course of like a couple other small projects, I ended up just rebuilding the same thing over and over again, which was like, basically the precursor to Basecoat UI, which was very similar to what ShadCN did. And yeah, I mean, working on the latest project, realized that maybe I should clean that up and really make it as close as possible to ShadCN UI so that I can benefit from, well, the existing amount of like, the large amount of existing kind of guidelines and tutorials and whatnot that are already out there. But most importantly, things like the theming system, because there's already
Yeah.
a lot of things that exist. And yeah, so that's how I ended up kind of building that thing.
So the theming stuff. So you can actually so it's a ShadCN. It's based on that as a starting point, but you can you've made your own sort of taking the classes that are part of that and bringing them into an apply. So basically assigning them to a single class. This is sort of a tailwind thing. This apply. So like button, for example, has a bunch of individual tailwind classes. You've got code in Basecoat UI that says like apply when you do BTN. Because actually, I mean, this was funny because I was looking through this and it feels like the perfect mashup of Bootstrap and Tailwind, where it's like you've got these base classes like BTN for button, but you're combining those into a single class. But then you can still use the themes from ShadCN. Is that how does that kind of work?
Well, so the way that ShadCN is built is it declares a whole bunch of CSS variables, right? And then actually in that upcoming version, which is using Tailwind version 4, they're actually getting a lot closer to the standard CSS, right? So they had a bunch of kind of more hackish stuff that was going on before, and they were doing a lot more in the build step of Tailwind CSS. They don't do as much nowadays. But yeah, so in ShadCN, they declare kind of like, I don't know, there's probably about like 30 variables or more that go, it's anything from like colors to border radius to spacing for a bunch of the different elements and kind of the fundamentals of the design system. And
Yeah.
you can declare it for both the light and dark theme. And so you have the ability to just basically uh, customize the theme quite heavily without having to go and touch any of the classes. You just change the CSS variables, right? Which makes sense. I think anybody who's worked on a design system with CSS has done that. I used to do that with like SCSS or what was that? SAS? I don't remember. But
Yeah,
yeah,
SAS and LAS or
yeah,
something. It's a couple
you'd
of
be
them.
able to go and use variables and just kind of carry that on into your theme. And now with like the support of like CSS variables everywhere, it's actually possible. So that's what is like the thing that I've really that I've taken like 100% from ShadCN UI is just really that all those variables are actually coming in the same as what ShadCN UI has, with maybe one or two minor modifications due to the fact that some idiosyncrasies related to me having to use pure HTML and CSS. So you can go and take any theme out there for ShadCN UI and then just drop it and import it into your Tailwind file, your Tailwind CSS file, and then off you go. It will work seamlessly. Um,
Wow.
I think one thing I'd like to also mention on, because you were making the point of like those wall of classes. And I think a lot of people just really push that mindset of using utility classes like through and through. And so you can see things, for example, you that Flowbyte, which is also a popular component library. I mean, a design system. I mean, a Tailwind CSS component library. And they encourage you to copy paste examples of this is the button, this is the dialog, this is this. But it's just really overwhelming. Lots and lots of classes. And I think the idea though is that there's lots of value in using the utility classes for performance reason, but also because it just really gives you, well, that locality of behavior and the ability to really customize things, because we've all been there where, Bootstrap or whatever other UI kit you've used gets you 90% there, but then there's that like 10 to 20% of customization or things that are just more specific to your app that you like to go and customize, and you end up having to either override the style. It's always a bit of a mess, or you just
Right.
create like some custom classes. And I think that's where Tailwind is actually incredibly helpful, especially for me. Like most of the layout work, for example, you do is almost always better put as utility classes because it's very clear what it is. It's not
Right.
that much work, and you can really customize it and and adapt it to your specific needs. But then when you go all the way down to, for example, like a button, you don't want to repeat, like you're going to use the same button over and over and over again. So you don't want to repeat the same thing. So I think and that's kind of the idea behind base code. It's just that the middle ground where the more atomic the elements are, the more likely you're going to have a class for that to just do it. And then as you go more in complexity, you still have the opportunity of overriding some of the behaviors with additional utility classes on the same elements, which is what I'm doing and what ShadCN UI does as well, right? So adding, maybe you want to have a larger button, you say, the height is that much, or I'm going to increase the padding or increase the size of the font. And and then all the custom stuff that you don't necessarily want to go and have, either because it's a one-off element or because it's like a very specific element, like a layout, a layout piece, then you just use regular Tailwind UI utility classes. So yeah.
So you're saying like CSS is complicated. So like I've worked on I've done a little bit of just my own project trying to kind of a really low level version of something like this. So something I can just drop into a project and have some basic components and stuff like that. And one of the things that I came across is that if you do something like the BTN, I'll just keep using that as an example because I think every project would use buttons,
Yeah.
So you do that, and that applies your sort of defaults classes. Now, how does that work with the order of the classes? So let's say you wanted to then customize that, and you said you could sort of just like add a height, make some changes. Let's say you wanted to give it extra padding on that button or something like that. Do the classes you add after BTN, do those override the ones that are part of that apply, or do they go along with it? Like, do you have a concept of sort of what that order of operations is for how those classes get added?
Yeah, so they just override it, right? So you'd have like button, and then you can just do, let's say you want to nullify the border on the right side. You want to make it like, the rounding of the right side. You want to go and nullify that. It's just say like, rounded dash R for right dash 0, and that will just work. It will just override the properties that are defined in BTN. So in most cases, it's actually enough, right? Now there are some cases where, because you have to undo so many things in the existing style, it makes no sense, and you would still
Right.
just still kind of like drop all the classes you have in the existing class and then make your modification because it's just easier and it doesn't really make sense to go and try and override anything. But again, like it's usually for one-off elements, and we're back to the problem that in many cases, and I think the flaw in many of those existing component libraries is like I want to be able to still read my code and feel like I understand what's going on. It's like, oh, it's a standard element, it's a button, right? Like all the classes. And if I see a bunch of classes, I say, oh, it's a custom thing. So maybe it's also something that I should actually go and pay more attention to. It's obvious just reading at the code. It's like, it's either one-off or it's a layout element or it's something more complicated. I may want to go and pay attention to it. Otherwise, it's things that are just like, one, two classes, like, okay, those are standard elements. Does this make sense?
Oh, yeah, it's interesting because this was kind of, I've talked recently about where there was sort of an online debate of like code and dirty versus clean code.
Yeah.
And this actually sounds similar to that concept where it's like you can just look at the code, and if everything is just plain default, no customizations, then it just looks simple, straightforward. Once you start to see bunches of code, bunches of classes, that's like an indicator that something different, something special is happening here. Whereas if you're just using straight Tailwind utility classes for everything, when you look at the code, you cannot tell what's important, what's customized, what's the way it should be, what's not. So I think I can see the value for sure in having kind of like, okay, I've defined my defaults. Those are going to look really simple. And then anytime I go through and I see a bunch of classes, I'm like, okay, I'm making something special here. Is that sort of fit the mental model of what you're thinking of?
Yeah, yeah, and I think in many this is one of the main reasons. Like, there's a few reasons why I got really burned out with the Next.js system, mostly React, and and one of those issues was all the complexity is like it's like Russian dolls. Like, it's complexity. It's a little bit of complexity and a little bit of complexity and a little bit of complexity and a little bit of complexity, and you never quite know where truly there is complexity because again, like ShadCN UI has a button component, but I mean, there's a button element in HTML, and I'm sure some people can explain
Yeah.
why there's a button element, and I'm sure there's something there.
Well, there's a
But
link component in some of these. It's
yeah,
like
the
with an
link,
A tag. Like,
I would understand why the link, because you do need you may need to actually go have a link to do some of the stuff with the routing, right? Because with the context
okay.
of a React app, you don't necessarily you need to be able to go and potentially catch the it's not a regular, like full
Yeah,
refresh of the
yeah.
page. Um,
Same
and
with
okay,
HTMX.
fine,
That's true.
you know,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But I think yeah, in many cases, when you just extend this concept to the entirety of your code base, it becomes very complicated to really know. I mean, there's an aspect of it that is from an engineering standpoint, it's like it's neat. You can just hide complexity away, and then you have a clean interface, and it's fine. There's tons of places where this makes a lot of sense, and it works really great. The issue though is it's been taken so far, and for a lot of very trivial things that you end up in many cases with with bugs or issues that are really hard to debug or hard to figure out or hard to even just realize that you take a huge performance hit because there's like a thing 3 levels down that you didn't really understand how it works, and it's now kind of biting
Right.
you in the ass. So yeah.
Yeah, it's like when you add all that magic, or I mean, I think of it in terms of the virtual DOM. Once you sort of abstract the DOM away and make everything the virtual DOM all the time, it starts to get, in my mind, like you're adding a layer that, yes, it gives you some interesting abilities, but it's like the cost is like you're adding an entire duplicated layer of everything all the time.
Yeah,
So
and again, like I think there are cases where it makes a lot of sense. I would still use, for example, I mean, at this stage, I would probably use Vue.js because I think the ergonomics of Vue are actually a lot better than React. But I'd be fine with using React as well if I had, let's say, like really complex client side interaction that I needed to go and hash out. Like, let's say you're doing like I don't know, movie booking, and like there's a really complex set of rules on how there's like real time updates on the seats that are taken, and you want to have some sort of visualization, and so yeah, I mean at this stage, sure, you have so many kind of client side interaction that it makes sense to go and have like a fairly heavy framework. Although I may even try to go and make it work with Alpine JS, but I can understand that
or
in some
data
cases,
star, what you're
yeah,
describing.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Wow,
or data star, right? You could
interesting.
do that too. But yeah, it is in many cases the reality is the vast majority of applications out there are still using a very simple set of like forms and buttons and links and like the web that we've all kind of known to be for like 20 plus years.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is what I found too, where the stuff that I'm building, it's like it's all built on these sort of core things, and I haven't, there's definitely some situations where I can see like you would want to have 100% client side. Obviously you need to connect to the server and share some stuff, but you're doing your work on the client side. I do think it's overused. But one, I feel like one thing it's given you coming from that background is like looking at Basecoat UI. It's an impressive project. Like it's an impressive design project, and I think it comes like there's a different aesthetic, and I love the aesthetic of a lot of the sort of hypermedia, old web stuff. Like I do enjoy that personally, but I think there's this sort of idea that like there's two camps. There's like really old school looking stuff, and there's like fancy new React, you know, um, Next.js stuff. And there's no reason in my mind why like stuff built not using React and Next.js, can't look like that. Like that's more of a design issue. And so I think it's what you have done, I think, is it feels like you've brought some of those design principles and that design experience from that world into this kind of thing. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, although I think you're being a little too kind. I stole a lot of the ideas and design from others, and I'm a half decent designer, I would say, but definitely, I'm not the one who came up with
Yeah, but
most of the
stealing good
design system.
design is part of it.
Yeah, I have taste in
Deciding
stealing
what is
things from
good to
others.
steal. Yeah, exactly.
Maybe tasteful thief, right?
Yeah,
As any Frenchman would be, right? As you would expect. Um, but yeah, I mean, I do agree with you. Like I do like the aesthetic of like the simpler web, quote unquote, right? You just don't have to go and bother yourself. I love what Carson's doing. I think that will community actually beyond even Carson. There's lots of people doing cool stuff. But I think, and I was reflecting on this as well the other day because I've been doing more and more work in the Python community, and I'm building a bunch of things there, and realizing that it's really a shame that most Python open source projects and libraries and whatnot that are online are just awfully represented. It's like really poor branding. You go on most of those websites, they have like a documentation generated by Sphinx, and it just looks like exactly the same from one side to another. And I mean, sure, it's functional, but it looks very kind of like early 2000s. And the reality
right.
is especially for younger folks, that getting into web development, getting into web development in the past 10 years, you look at the average like JavaScript, Node.js, React project, it's really, really well done. Most of the websites are like really well thought through. There's pretty good documentation, but more importantly, it looks good. It's got a lot of like best practices around. There's always a get started button. There's always like an installation page. And so I think
Right.
we gotta, if we want to make like things like htmx and alpine and Flask and many other things of that sort kind of more appealing, we got to go and at least, put in some amount of effort in trying to go and make things uh, half decent and half modern as possible. Uh, yeah. So
Right. No, I mean,
that's the hope.
I appreciate that a lot about this project in general, because not only is the site itself, I think, taking on those principles and kind of, being a demonstration, it's also just by its nature giving other people like myself the tools to make their own sites, you know, customizable in a way that, like, I've felt like ShadCN is kind of, out of my, it's, I'm not going to go back to using a build process for stuff. So I'm like, and I think that's sort of you can't really, use ShadCN without sort of React and other kind of NPM stuff and things like that. So I do think it opens up a lot of possibilities for people to, um, be able to sort of have a default quality level of design in their projects. And I've been looking for something like this for a long time. So I'm pretty excited. I got to use Basecoat. I just I worked with you a little bit on just getting it so it worked with my setup, which is the no build setup, but it's working great. And I haven't had a chance to sort of test out everything, but so far, I mean, it's looking really awesome. I'm looking forward to using trying the different templates as well.
Yeah, and I plan on adding more competence, but also probably making more examples, like concrete examples of complete apps. So there's one that I'm working on right now. It's basically a chatbot, just a simple kind of like chat interface with like using all the kind of interactions you would expect. You do commentate and you have the comment that just pops up to go and search your history of chats, and obviously that kind of is streaming, and trying to demonstrate not only how to use Basecoat to actually go and make a modern looking interface, but also how do you integrate that with Flask or whatever other kind of server-side language, and then libraries like htmx to go and do things that are pretty similar, so pretty similar to what you would have in the React world. Right? So if there's an error or a success, whatever message that pops up from the server, how do you actually go and actually show a model that looks like it's part of that client side, but really it's actually coming from the server. So hopefully things of that nature to go and show like concrete examples. And so there's that, and hopefully as well getting to creating more marketing type of content, I mean, like marketing
Right.
layouts, so that people can use it in, in more trivial context of like, there's one that I'm using for, I'm rebuilding like for one of my projects, the documentation, and it's built on 11T, which is a static generator. And it's all going to be using ShadCN UI. So I'm trying to go and make it as standard as possible with a tiny bit of htmx to do things like htmx boost, to go
Okay.
and
Yeah.
not lose the position of your sidebar and things of that nature. But yeah, I think it requires also more examples. It's a little bit simplistic right now. It's kind of like, well, at least it leaves people figuring out how to use it. And I think it'd be good to have more examples.
Yeah, I mean, and I think like just looking at some of the other examples of these types of sites, like I use Tailwind UI all the time, and the Tailwind's website also has it, but Tailwind UI primarily. Like those kind of layout things, which to you are maybe also just kind of really straightforward or something, because it doesn't even use necessarily like your setup. It's just pure Tailwind utility classes, like you said. But including stuff like that, I think is really key because it's like you said, like there's, you know, you have there are these sort of industry standards, like you said, the installation button and the, like get started and just these kind of like
Yeah.
basic kind of things that when I go and I'm trying to build a site, it's even if it's really, I could have obviously just done it myself in a lot of cases of layout and, but getting started and just having that shell, I love having that as like
Yeah.
just a way to kind of get started on a project.
Yeah. So I'll probably, I have a couple projects to finish, right? I mean, I have that thing that I'm working on right now that I'm trying to wrap up. But most likely, by the end of June, I'll have like a good chunk of that out. I was also working on charts, so support for like nice charts that I can integrate into Basecoat. But definitely the
Hmm.
marketing content that you have in Tailwind UI, and I think that's the Tailwind Plus. I mean Tailwind UI Plus or whatever it is. And well, I know it's actually Tailwind UI. Yeah, you're right. I think now they call that Tailwind Plus.
Yeah,
Or
now it's
yeah.
they
Um,
changed it, but I forget what it is. I think it is
but yeah,
plus. I think that's right.
I mean, you've seen that in most of the modern kind of component libraries. They all have like the same kind of like pages, and it's all like it's landing pages. It's like all the the configuration screen, the this, the that, and I think I'll just do the same, and then just like try and go and have like a fairly standardized set of templates that you can get started with, and then a couple more hands-on or more interactive examples like the documentation, the documentation website, and the chatbot that I think kind of like help you as well understand like how to use that in the context of a real either static side or a real. Yeah, I'll get there fairly quickly.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean it's all right. It's already a pretty big project. So, can I ask you some tough questions about it?
Go ahead.
All right. Okay, so it's ambitious and you are a single person, right? So is this something that you feel like you can maintain like over time? Like what does that kind of look like for you? I mean, and I know, like I said, this is a tough question because nobody knows the future and people deal with burnout and stuff like that. But just like from your perspective so far, what's it kind of look like for maintaining something like this?
Yeah, I mean it's all right. I mean the first reason I created it is because I needed it, so I'm gonna keep on
Right.
needing it. So there's an obvious reason as to why I would keep on investing in it, right? I want to have something that is like working great across all browsers. I'm making sure I'm like keeping up with whatever changes ShadCN may introduce, and making sure to kind of like follow pretty closely what they may actually change. So there's that. Second thing is I have a lot of free time on my hands because I'm professionally unemployed these days. And so
Okay.
that's a huge plus. I can spend a lot of time actually. I spend most of my time in the past like 6+ months on open source. And
Wow.
and so there's that. And then the goal is also to drum up as much interest from the community that some people are actually willing to go and help out. And I realized that already on the previous project. I got well, I'm like at 2,500 stars, which is like still fairly small. But even at 2,500 stars, it's actually quite difficult to find contributors who are
Hmm.
actually willing and able to go and provide quality quality PRs. Now, I
Right.
I got a little bit more engagement already from the community on this one. I think I also got really quickly there. I got 2,000 done in about 2 weeks. So it's
Wow.
not, you know, it's not amazing, the best project ever, but I think it's good enough to believe that there should be, like a pretty decent amount of people interested in with, with their own issues or their own extensions. So I'm hoping that we get to a place where we have enough decent contributors that they can actually go and do the work. But in the meantime, I think the fact that I'm not incurring the really expensive part of the work, which is like figuring out those classes. On a thing like this, the only part that is on me that is a little bit difficult, it's the and
Hmm.
because you need to go and maintain it, make sure it's actually right for you. So far, people have not complained about this piece. And there's also the decision of how you structure the pure HTML component. But it's usually a one-off, right? Like it takes you maybe an hour to go and figure out how you want to do it, like in a way that you're comfortable with, and you don't have to go and think too much about it. And it's also finite, right? Like there's not like a 2,000 components. There's the components that I
Right.
already have laid out, and then there's maybe a half a dozen to maybe 10 more components that I should just work on, like drawers and comment and a bunch of other things that are already in the work. So no, I wouldn't expect this to be too hard for me to actually go and keep that up and running.
Interesting. Yeah, and I mean, it's you have it's there is sort of a guideline of what the market wants and needs in ShadCN and in other similar libraries, Tailwind UI and these other kind of things. So at least there's you don't have to sort of invent the market yourself. It's like you
Yeah.
sort of know what people need, also just from doing it yourself, and using it yourself, which is in my mind a huge benefit. Like if you're going to use this on your projects, you're going to keep it in a good
Yeah,
shape. Like,
I'm only in htmx and alpine. I don't mind touching a little bit of React here and there these days, but I really believe that I actually believe that I want to believe that a part of a part of, like, there are many other people who are actually also tied with the very heavy kind of like thick client approach that actually it's not even thick client anymore. It's like thick client and server side rendering approach, which to me is the part kind of like that convinced me, like, okay, if I'm going to start to go and work on, if I'm going to start to go and server render things, then why would I bother? Like, it's just,
all
let's use
right.
something way simpler. But yeah, I mean, I hope that there's more and more interest in that, and that I find more contributors to go and help me support it. But in the meantime, I don't think it's actually that much of an effort. And so far, I haven't had too many bugs. There's been a little bit of like weirdness around Firefox and Windows on things that it just wasn't aware of, like like select boxes. Somehow the options are themable, and so there was like a couple kind of weird things like that. But otherwise, it's fairly standard. Actually, most like Chrome is and Firefox now, but most browsers are actually fairly standard on like on CSS properties and web standards these days. So it's not too
Well, also
hard.
you're building it on the back of
Yeah, Tailwind.
Tailwind,
Yeah,
which like
yeah.
they've sorted out a lot of those really annoying, you know, browser specific things with their stuff too.
But it feels
Like,
it feels good not to have to run a Windows VM to actually test like IE 6 and 7, right?
yeah,
I
you
don't
ever
know
use
if
that
you've done that,
website?
but
Yeah,
yeah,
there used to be a website where you send in
yeah,
your link
yeah,
and
yeah,
then
yeah.
it shows you like 15
I
different
know.
Windows screens. I don't know if you guys use
Yeah,
that one.
it's browser stack or browser something. I don't remember. But yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
that
I
sounds right
remember
to me.
as
That's what I used to
such.
use for
It
Windows.
was it was such a pain. I mean, it used to be like those incredibly frustrating bugs that you had no idea how to solve, right? And you would spend literally like an afternoon moving properties around and then hoping that it would not break the other versions, right? And somehow fix your bug.
Yeah, and you just get that one user who calls on the
Yeah,
phone and is like, I'm like, okay, well, what browser are you using? They're like, let's see. Looks like I'm on a Windows machine, Internet Explorer
Opera.
10. Yeah, I'm like, oh, okay. All right. So now I have to figure out a way to recreate this situation. So,
Yeah,
yeah, I've had a
and
lot
again,
less of those.
I mean, I think it's again like a reason why I hope that people realize that they don't need most of those like really complex frameworks. Not only because like if you're going to go and do server rendering, there are way better ways and simpler ways to do that, but more importantly, it's just the web browsers got really good in the past 10 years, and they really, really figured out, like they really closed the gap on a lot of the stuff that used to be really hard to do. Even
Right.
as of late, they've announced the fact that they have, what's the API really they have now in place to be able to go and move objects through the DOM, and they preserve the state, which is a big deal because you can just do a lot like really interesting stuff with it. But
Yeah.
also supporting things like themable select boxes, which I think probably like 50% of the value prop of React is just like, oh, I can do like drop downs with like custom themes. It's like if you already have that in the browser, then
Yeah.
you're already there, right? So
No, I mean, like I'm thinking of this, long term, just in terms of HTMX, but also in terms of the web. And it's like browsers are going to keep getting better. They're going to keep supporting more things. HTMX is not going to be changing, and it already does so much. So a lot of the sites that I build, like I'm not worried about it, losing my stuff like that. And it's like these types of technologies, like right now there's this, I think, sense that like if you want to do more fancy client side things, and I obviously there are some things that React is better for, like there's no question. I think than over some of the stuff that I do, but like I'm at the like we're pushing. I've been trying to push the boundaries a little bit in my own projects for like a really sort of slick experience, because as much as I love like the web 1.0 look and feel also, I don't want to feel like I am restricted at any point. Like this is just, my personal thing. Like I don't want, so if I'm going to use these tools, I want to figure out what the boundaries are. And what I'm finding is like there's not that many boundaries, like between like transitions and, there's just like ultimately you still have to get stuff from the server and put it onto the page, no matter what system you're using. You just do it in different ways, whether you have that preloaded or what. So it's like the I think over time, people are the idea that there's all these boundaries. I feel like that's not going to last forever, because it doesn't really seem to be true anymore.
yeah, yeah, and I can't remember exactly what, but I do remember going through Basecoat and before that the projects that I was working on, and then realizing that, oh no, I do remember. I can't remember what exactly the interface is, but I was working on the drop down component, the drop down menu, and realizing that in some cases you may want to do the drop down, you may want to make that drop down, um, you maybe want to have like overflow auto, you may want to have a scroll bar if there are too many elements in there, and then figuring out that okay, but then because there's actually keyboard navigation, you go down, you may actually go and have the selected element disappearing and not showing up in the in the view of the scroll bar anymore. And then
Hmm.
kind of starting to panic because I'm like, oh Jesus, I'm gonna have to figure out which element is that. I mean, where the element is positioned in there, figure out the scroll for that. It's like, do I really want to bother with this? And then realizing that no, there's actually just a very simple function you call in JavaScript that's already supported that just makes sure that the focused element is in the visible window. So it's
Oh,
just literally
interesting.
a one-liner. And there's a lot of those small things like that that through the past few months working with like a more traditional stack, I realized well, like, oh wait, it's already there. Like it's actually not hard to do anymore. It's really not a big deal.
And it's like because it's low level, like you're right there working with the original, browser API. Stuff like that is fast usually.
Yeah,
They've done a lot of work for optimizing it also.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
I mean, yeah. Part of the frustration actually for me working on my React projects were getting really frustrated with dealing with. I won't name the library, but it's a table library basically in React,
Okay.
the more popular one, and they're doing a lot of work to make it performant because React is actually, at least my experience, and maybe it's because skills issue, but it's been kind of difficult once you start to go and have a lot of data to actually go and make it work well. And so they do a lot of optimizations around kind of virtualizing the rows and making sure that you only actually go and render the rows that are visible in the window and all that jazz. But it's a freaking table. It's a table. In HTML, you could just put a table with 10,000 rows and then display it in the page. And as long as you don't go
Yeah.
bonkers on the styling or JavaScript, you're good to go. It's a table. And I'm really getting frustrated because like anything that required like the tiniest of change to it was incredibly difficult. And
Yeah.
so going back to just like, well, it's a table, so just use a table and call it a day is actually quite refreshing. And yeah,
Yeah, so I'll just say a quick. That's basically exactly what got me started on HTMX, because I was working on a project that was like a writing project, and the concept is like I wanted to be able to write and organize people who are writing stories, so that they write their stuff, but I want to have sections that you could tag. So each paragraph, you tag with some icon or something like that. So it could be very long. Like this is like people could write 50,000 words, 10,000, so something very long. And I started with, I'm in the Laravel ecosystem. So I started with Livewire and Alpine, which is like, fine. And it was just, once I got past like 500, items, it just started to like really hurt for performance, really slow, like unusable. So I got rid of the Livewire. I was like, okay, I'll just use Alpine. And it was so slow still. And I was just like, this is ridiculous. Like, I can't, like, maybe I just can't show all these things. And that's what I looked at React and I was like, let's see what React, and not even a possibility. Like, they
yeah,
say immediately, don't show, you cannot show all the things. Like, no user wants to see 1,000 elements. And it's like, actually, like, I want to see 1,000 elements or 10,000 sometimes because I can search through them quickly. I can edit quickly. So I was just looking, I was like, okay, I'll just go to straight HTML. And it worked like amazingly. It worked, it was extremely fast. I upped it to like 10,000. And then I started thinking like, well, how can I still edit just one row without refreshing every time? And that was when I tested
right.
HTMX, and I put full interactive things on every line. So I had probably 10,000 interactive elements using HTMX, and it was almost exactly the same speed as the pure HTML version. And so this to me was like, okay, this is like a new concept. And, my thought process there is that even Alpine, it does use a little bit of the virtual DOM. It puts your state for that little scope into the virtual DOM. And so this is using your JavaScript memory. This is what's really slowing the browser down. And this was true of Livewire also, which I love Livewire for a lot of things, but it has to keep all your state in that virtual DOM, and it just slows stuff down. So that to me was like, HTMX really shown for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the beauty of just using standard HTML
Yeah, just
technology.
HTML. And
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me as well. Like, that's actually what I fell in love with originally. Was like really the ability to really quickly design interfaces. Although I do remember spending about a year working on Zool apps back in the day. That was the UI language for Firefox at the time. It's an XML based language to build basically native interfaces. Um, but yeah, I mean, HTML is still like incredibly good at just building whatever it is that you want, really, as long as you put in a little bit of effort. But I think there
right,
were just genuine reasons as to why React came to be, like, in like what 2013, around that time, right?
right,
And yeah, I mean, it did the job pretty well. But yeah, I don't think it necessarily. I think it's been taken a little bit too far, right? And so hopefully with
right,
Basecoat we can actually go and build good looking apps that are on par with what the cool kids build these days with React, and we can show off a little bit of our skills with, like, no, it can work just the same. If it looks the same, like there's at least a there's a better chance you can convince people that, like, it's more performant and it's easier and it's simpler if, like, at least on a visual level you're not distracting them with, like, yeah, but it looks like it was designed in
yeah.
207.
I think that's been the funny thing. That's been a big part of my experience looking at these things, and that's why I really appreciate when people do projects using some of these tools, and they make them look like modern, like modern stuff. Because as much as I don't so much care about the design, I think just the story being told should be more about like these two things functionally and visually can look the same, work the same, and actually, be better with using the sort of hypermedia version for a lot of use cases.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, evening out the visual part, because people care about visuals. Like, as much as they don't, I notice this when I post things on like Twitter or whatever. If I'm posting functionality, if I make it look pretty, even just just that one little screen, people, you can just tell like the engagement or whatever. Like it just hits people different when something looks really nice. When I put the time into it to make it look really nice.
It's frustrating, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
sometimes work on something really cool and you put a lot of effort into it and then you put out there and you think like, the technology should speak for itself. And then crickets, nobody cares. And then you do that small, crappy little kind of like proof of concept, but it looks good and people are like, oh, this is amazing. I love it.
That's
Yeah, I mean,
very
it
true.
does,
Yeah.
it does matter. It does matter. And I think, again, like if you want to make the point that there are at least like alternatives to to React and Vue and whatever else people use these days. And you could just go, and it's not necessarily going to fit all your use cases, but in many cases, you could actually go and use regular HTML technology and hypermedia and be perfectly fine in the other interest to same value, potentially with much better performances. Then yeah, I mean, if it looks like crap, it's very distracting, and it's kind of hard to go and make the argument that it's better. The first thing people see is like, okay, but like right off the bat, it doesn't look like something I would like to use. And it's a
Yeah.
shame because I think that model is actually quite amazing.
Yeah, and,
Really,
and a big part of that is that it's not like everyone in the React whatever world is just really good designers. It's that they go to ShadCN and press the copy button and paste it, and they have that option. So I don't know. I'm super excited about Basecoat, and I'm looking forward to using it.
so actually, one of the things that I was thinking of doing is the chatbot that I was starting to go and work on. I wanted to see if I could do a V0 for Basecoat slash htmx type of thing, or alpine and whatnot. So being able to go and I don't know if you've tried V0, which is it's basically a chatbot to design interfaces, to generate interfaces,
Okay, I
using
haven't.
ShadCN UI and React. So it's from Vercel, right? And you have the ability to just basically prompt the AI and then just say, hey, I'd like to go and build I don't know, it's like an invoicing software. There's those kind of things should actually go and show up, yada, yada, yada. And it just generates the interface and gives you the code that you can copy paste in directly in your project, right? And I was thinking that I could do the same. So that it just generates you all the code that you need for a regular kind of Basecoat Alpine and htmx app, and then you just basically prompt it, gives you the interface, visualize it for you, and then off you go. You just copy the code, put it into your project, and then potentially massage a little bit the back end to go and actually have that coming from your database or whatnot, and done.
Are you saying this would be like? Sorry, I'm not familiar with the V0, but is this an AI generated sort of like
Yeah.
you are setting an AI to learn how to build these, and then based
Mhm.
on what they want, it uses the AI to
Yeah,
build
so
them a
so
version?
V0 is just generative AI for user interface using ShadCN UI. So you literally just go there and you can drop a few lines
Wow.
explaining what your app should do, and it generates you all the code for the interface. And so you can just then
Okay.
take that code and then straight up use it into your project with ShadCN UI, and it will work. Like you just have to obviously write the backend code and whatnot, and like is there authentication or what? Like those things are not obviously sorted out for you, but it gets you like a pretty good. It really kind of speed things up when you're trying to prototype the tool, and I think again there's an opportunity there to show that you could build a tool like that, the generative UI, the generative AI itself. You could actually build a tool that does the same thing, functionally speaking, using htmx, and I think it's possible. But on top of it, you could just build as well something for people who want to adopt HTMX and HTML and Alpine and whatnot to go and have something that they can then literally you paste into the project and then write a few endpoints for generating the content. Like using even JSX if you want to actually go and generate the backend
Wow.
generated parts, right? So yeah.
No, I mean that sounds cool, and you could use this for sort of not just necessarily full sites, but like sections of your site, certain
Yeah.
pages and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
And prototyping and a whole bunch of different use cases, right?
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that's cool.
Again, like I think it's part of like trying to show that you can do cool modern things with that old crummy HTML. It's totally possible. Like you really
Yeah,
don't have
yeah,
to, like one of the reasons I got really frustrated with React was like there was that table issue, and there were a bunch of others that were starting to go and really pile on. And then also the fact that like, okay, if you're going to start to go and tell me that the way to do things now is RSC, like React Server Components, and I need to generate server side. I mean, React is not the best the best language to do that. But
yeah,
I think one of the things that got me frustrated was like trying to go and figure out in one of those interfaces. I was trying to figure out that library that I was using. How is the streaming working? Like, and it's very simple server sent events, right? But it was just like again like Russian dolls, and it was like a library in a library in a library in a library, and I was like, I don't
yeah.
understand what's going on. I don't know where I'm supposed to go and customize it. I don't know how I'm modify it.
This
And
is
I
the
think a lot of
layers
people
of
are under
abstraction.
yeah, and I think a lot of people are under the impression that, well, if you want to do SSE and you want to do modern stuff which streams like content to the interface, and it's going to hold state and have like nice smooth transitions and all that jazz like you have in modern apps. Well, of course, you need to have like React or Vue.js. It's like no, it's not true. Like holding, for example, state of streaming between two different chats that you have, and then being able to go and show it when you actually go and swap. It's not complicated. I mean, it requires a little bit of engineering to figure out how you do it, but it's basically you have like two connections to like server sent events, or even one if you want to go and stream all the chats at once, and then
Right.
just figuring out what you display. It's really not that complicated. So
No, I
yeah,
agree, and this is something because I use htmx for almost everything, but I've done these sort of data star. There's a mental switch. I have a hard time with the events, like a streaming of events. I'm used to text HTML and just throwing HTML around. That's my like world. But I built sort of a little chat thing exactly like you're describing, using the server sent events, and it's like you said, it's not that the SSE, the service, like creating a connection and leaving it open and then just
yeah,
having it kick stuff back. And, I use Redis as my sort of queuing system, and Redis is great. Like it's tested to the wall. Like, it's very reliable. And yeah, it was not a lot of code. It was not like conceptually the hardest part was just switching over to an event stream mindset.
yeah, yeah. I haven't had the time to play with it, but I did. I did watch an interview. I don't know if it was with you or somebody else. Or maybe it was with was it with Carson? I don't know. I know I remember. No, it wasn't Carson. But
Maybe Delaney
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Gilliam.
It,
Yeah.
it does sound like an interesting approach, but probably like I'm probably like you. I'm probably not smart enough to use it well. So I may get to it in like in a few years, but in the meantime, I'm like, you know what? I understand like you send a request and you get HTML back. I understand how you piece that together into a page, and that's actually good enough. I do think that there's a mental load as well when you deal with all those really complex abstractions and you're constantly doing very, very elegant things from an engineering standpoint, on and on and on for the most simplest of things that you have on the interface. It just, at least for me, it leaves very little time then to go and really focus on the hard things, which
Right.
most of the time are actually back end stuff, which is like, okay, like there's that really, really complex, like on the other projects I was working on, there's that caching system that I need to go and do it. So I receive like webhooks from GitHub, and I need to go and maintain kind of like a cache of the content in a repository. And it's not simple because you need to go and make a lot of different kind of decisions on like how do you invalidate the cache, what do you actually go and cache, how often do you cache, how do you actually go and process the webhook so that you don't end up doing like all kinds of like individual requests to the GitHub backend, because every request is like at least 100, if not 300 milliseconds. And so that adds up. Like if you have like 6 of them, you're going to go and be waiting almost 2 seconds just for the GitHub stuff. And so that kind of stuff is where I want to spend my time. I want to make sure that the
Yeah.
real kind of things that I can't go to GitHub and just say, fix it for me. I have to go and work around those constraints. And there's like, it's an interesting engineering problem. But then kind of like dealing with how do I make my table not crash when I actually go and have like, 200 items, or, like the other day I was using a React website, and I pasted a bunch of text in one of the text areas, and it was just too much text, and so literally the app froze and then just literally crashed my entire browser. It was like quite shocking actually. I was like, wow,
Which, like,
what
your
happened there?
browser could handle that. There's no question. Like, the
Yeah,
problem is that when you put that into the text area, it got put into the JavaScript, like
yeah,
virtual memory. It's like,
yeah.
Your
And
browser can handle it.
and it's even worse than that because actually I did the same in VS Code and I crashed VS Code, right? Because it's all
Yeah,
web technologies these days, right? So you really have
interesting.
to understand those things actually kind of do impact you, because that's not just the websites anymore. Like a lot of I actually read, and I'm not sure if it's true, but I read on Twitter yesterday that the startup menu in Windows is actually a React
Yes,
app.
I saw that too. It's a React
And I
native app, the start menu, and I just like I almost like I would like couldn't believe it. Like that's not believable to me, but maybe
I
it's
mean, it sounds
true. I
like an
mean,
April Fool, but
yeah,
I mean, I'm sure there's a reason, right? And that's actually a good illustration of the problem. It's like I'm sure there's a reason. Like I don't think anybody went into this thinking like, yeah, like yeah, I don't care, or like it's like because I have like huge skills issue or whatever. Like there's a reason. Like the team that actually did that had like a set of constraints, and they're probably not in control of everything, and then they had to go and there was a job to be done, and like in the end you end up with this. But I think that's also what we've seen in a lot of like the past 10 years 10 plus years with like there was that really initial set of ideas around reactivity and state in the client and all those libraries that came out like backbones and angular and then later react, but people kept just on piling up on it, and at no point they just started to go and think like, have we done enough? Is it enough? Or do we even need to go and rethink some of our foundational assumptions there, right? And that's what I like as well with htmx in general, like in HTML, because it moves very slowly. So it's frustrating in many kind of ways, but you can still kind of like patch it with like some JavaScript on top. But overall, like they don't really introduce like new things too quickly, and so there's not so much that you actually can't make things performant in the meantime. Yeah, I mean, I think HTMX in that sense is like it's kind of done, right? It's like there's that scope of things we wanted to solve. It's solved. We'll do maintenance on them, but there's not really kind of a plan for more features. And we understand there's more use cases and more fancy stuff we could do, but you can probably handle it. Right? Like it's probably not like general use case enough that we should actually go and pile on top of that. And so I think hopefully some people will actually go and move more in that direction of like throwing things kind of like down and
well,
keeping
yeah. I
things
mean,
simple.
and I think what I've discovered just for myself, and I think talking to people on this is that throwing around HTML in the way that HTMX and just the way that the browsers handle it, it's extremely powerful. Like we were sort of saying like just keeping it simple and like not the mental model of just snippets of HTML left and right and from your server and in bits and pieces, like you can actually do like an unbelievable amount of stuff like that. And it's sort of what everything is like at some level, even if you have the virtual DOM,
Yeah.
ultimately you're just taking that HTML and putting it there, but you're getting it from the client and you're processing on the client. So where you do that, it's like the ability to just simplify things and get down to that base level of using HTML is surprisingly powerful also.
Yeah. I mean, I'm probably
Um,
too dumb for most of that kind of modern JavaScript stuff. I think I can hack it together, but
well, you did it for a
there's,
while, so you coming from a background of speaking from some experience though.
yeah, but
So
I did it in an age of AI, right? And if it weren't for AI, it probably would have taken me like at least twice as much time to get where I'm at now, right? I think the way that I started to go and work with React was, I think in end of 2022, I was just talking to ChatGPT, and I wonder like, oh, there's that thing that I never tried to do with the GitHub GraphQL API, because I always thought GraphQL was, I mean, I don't want to say the dumbest thing ever, but it didn't appeal to me one bit at all. And I understand that was the only way to actually go and get the data I wanted to go and get out of GitHub. And I just explained exactly what I wanted to do, and it just one shot it. Like I was like,
nice.
wait, it's actually working. And so that's mostly why I was able to go and do it with AI, right? But I don't think. I don't think my Greg brain would actually go and be able to pull that off without the help of like ChatGPT and Gemini and all our friends.
Well, they've done a lot of work to hide from you. So, like, I can, you're someone who likes to get into the lower level and figure things out, how things work, it seems like. And so
Yeah,
I think the React world doesn't really, that's not a big part of it, I don't think. Like, most of the time, the goal is to use the tools, and the tools should be good, but like, they're not low level. They're not trying to teach you sort of the web basics and stuff like that. And if you try to go deeper on some of them, it seems like it starts to get real hairy real quick. It's kind of
Maybe.
hard to track down some of these things, maybe.
Although I wouldn't want to go and speak ill of a lot of a lot of JavaScript slash React and Vue and whatnot. And a lot of JavaScript developers are actually way better developers than I am. I am not fooling myself into
Right.
thinking that I'm anywhere near the top, 5 to 10% of engineers. I'm good enough. I'm good enough. Like I think my main skill is I'm a polymath, so I'm a jack of all trades. So I can do a little bit of marketing, a little bit of design, a little bit of that, a little of this, and so that in and on its own is a skill. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of those people may not see the problem because they're just smarter and more gifted than I am. So they don't see it's like, sure,
Right.
it's a really complex tool, but it's like, like that's not an issue. I mean, to this day, I still don't use debuggers, for example. Like, I cleaned out the
Right.
error and I debug it that way. And I know it's
Yeah.
awful,
Yeah.
but I I don't really know any better. So
Yeah, well, only not all tools have a good debugger. I was actually talking to Carson about this last time. It's like, it's doing logging when you're doing internet work is almost the only way sometimes.
yeah,
Having a good debugger, I think, is very useful, but not every kind of ecosystem has one built in. So I only use debugger when I'm programming in Dart, and it's like because I desperately need it then because there's no other way to know what the hell's happening. So all right, so let me just finish on. I have one more question about base coats. So for the CDN, like, is a CDN possible when you have these kind of applied classes? Like, so if you're doing a CDN, the way that the way that the CLI, the Tailwind CLI works, yeah, and the build process is it's like doing a tree shaking. It's like throwing away all the classes that you don't need, and then so that it's like minifies it, makes it a small size,
right.
very efficient, all that kind of stuff. So how would a CDN work that needs to kind of have these kind of themes and other stuff? Is it possible?
Yeah. So next week you'll probably have the Grub version that is absolutely simple, and it's just listen. You have all the classes minified, compiled on the
I
CDN.
love it.
You use
Yep.
that.
Yep.
It's 100K. I actually did some tests. Like it's 100K. It's not pretty. I'd like it to be like way smaller. But hey, it's there, and you can use it. So if you want to go, especially considering how heavy most dependencies are online, and I think if you're just you don't want to be bothered with using Tailwind locally, like okay, fine, that's what it is. But I do think there's a way to actually go and do an online Tailwind an online um, version of the library that actually on the fly computes the classes that you use in the current page. And so that's what I
Wow.
was looking into. I know there are a couple projects that are just offering that for Tailwind at large. And so I'd still want to go and have as well the Tailwind, um, the Tailwind still working, right? Like I don't want to break if you want to use like the regular kind of classes as well. So I'm probably going to go and take one of those projects and either fork it or just take huge inspiration out of it, or maybe some of them actually support adding some extra custom code that just then gets integrated into their system. So I'll figure it out. But I think there is a way to actually go and still tree shake things, and it's possible if I can actually go and put this on like something like Cloudflare Workers or something that's kind of like serverless, and I can just do a little bit of like optimization with caching, and it's free. Then all the better. But it'll take me. I don't think it's like the highest priority right now. Like I think people are still comfortable with just a simple kind of Tailwind CLI one step. It's okay. And yeah, we'll see if we can make the CDN work.
Yeah, and I just to be clear, like I don't care. Like there's a big emphasis, I think, in like the JavaScript. Like people talk about htmx is 14K and data star is now like 12K. Like these are just tiny numbers, and I
Yeah,
honestly wouldn't care if they were 500K. And same with like having your design CSS, whatever it is, like it loads it once. Most browsers are going to cache that on that site the very first time you go there. 100K, 200K, whatever you end up at, I don't care. So if you are optimizing it and you like to sort of have it be
yeah,
smaller, and that means a lot to some people, I would say. But just the simplicity of being able to include something that has this kind of power and that makes the site look this good, I think that's awesome.
Yeah, and again, like the Grok the Grok version next week, it will work. It's not going to be necessarily the prettiest, but it will work. Like, so you can just go and get up and running with loading like Alpine, htmx, and Basecoat, from a CDN, and you can just go and start hacking things out, which I think is great, right? And I agree.
Yeah.
Like when you look at, I mean, I did a fair amount of trying to optimize bundle size for my Next.js project a few months ago, and it's like, I think the size of those things is just insane. It's like megabytes upon megabytes of code
Yeah.
for every single chunk,
Wild.
right? It's really crazy. And again, it's probably because of skills issue, right? I guess I don't know how to use it properly. Um, but I do think that, again, like I think it reflects on well, first, the care that I put in things. Like if it's not like to a certain amount like optimized, if I haven't even tried to go and make it smart, there's kind of an issue that means I probably don't care about a lot of other things. And I think it's also, again, like it's just, yeah, you can just load the full 150K or 120K or whatever that is into your app, but do you need the 120K? And it's not necessarily a problem of like bandwidth. Can you afford it? Like, of course you can afford it these days. It's nothing, 120K. But do you actually need it? And isn't that going to go and bite you in the ass again? Because now you have classes you don't use. You have like a bunch of code that is just like dead, and that may potentially conflict with other things you do. Like I don't think it's necessarily going to be the case for the vast majority of people, but it may, and it's just not good practice to have like things you don't actually need in your code base.
Right.
So that's the only thing that I would say, right? To make the parallel with what we talked about, this being code smell, that if you have complex things, especially complex things that are not needed, that it's probably not good. Then probably you want to go and at least try and go and optimize things.
Yeah. Nice. Well, so if anybody is watching this right now and has any open source experience and wants to kind of like you're looking for contributors, right? Like people to help out,
Yeah,
people to get involved, people to understand the code base and things like that right now.
exactly. Yeah, I mean it's
Awesome.
not that complicated. There's really just one. Honestly, I mean, there's the JavaScript, there's the HTML, whatever, but the CSS, it's one file. And there's a bunch of
Nice.
additional files for the custom themes and whatnot, but it's like really there's just one file that you could get, basecoat.css, like src slash basecoat.css, or maybe it's like in a subfolder.
Yeah.
And yeah, just look at it and you should be able to go and wrap your head around it fairly quickly and figure out that I'm definitely not the best developer in the world. Or at least I took the easiest approach, but it works. And so yeah, if you want to go and help out, I'd love some contributors.
I love it. I've never done any open source, which is I feel like a mark against me right now, and I would like to expand that. I'm not sure what my first open source helping is. I use so many open source projects, but I've just never contributed to one or looked into it. But I know there's a lot of people out there who have do work on these sort of things and help out. So
You want to
it's
help design the blink component?
the blink component. Yeah,
Yeah,
is
yeah,
it
we
the
need a blink
marquee?
component and the marquee. Yeah, I mean, I actually may want to go and add this just for fun. You know?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I'll take a look at it, but like I said, I've never contributed because I don't really understand the process that well. I've worked on lots of different projects, but the open source stuff, I don't know. I just have not broken that seal, but I hope to at some point in the near future. So maybe this will be my first attempt
That'd be great.
here.
You can help with the documentation as well, right? Like you can help like
Right.
do
There's like
that
an
too.
easy way to sort of
Hmm.
get started is just to like add a line or two into a document. You're not breaking anybody's code. So
Yeah. And if some people out there actually end up using Basecoat and you like it, I'd love to see what you built with it. I think I'm going to try and link on the website a bunch of case studies of like examples of people using it in the real world. So just do shoot me an email. I'll add a Discord link on the website next week so that people can
nice. I'll add
actually
it to
go
the
and
video here too.
kind of.
I'll add whatever links you want to add to the video.
Sounds
I'll
good.
put those in there too.
Awesome.
Nice. All right.